We're looking at the worksheet called Introduction After Recording. And this workbook is based on what we did in the previous movie, where we created a macro that simply will highlight all the number cells within any worksheet. And let's suppose we wanted to use it in this worksheet here called Formulas. We can click anywhere we want and then press its keystroke shortcut, which we may or may not have remembered, but in this case it's Control-Shift-N. Think of N for number. It highlights all the number cells. And we can use that in different worksheets. Say the profit sheet here. Control-Shift-N highlights just the number cells. That's it. When you create a macro, remember what you've really done when you've turned on the recording process is you've stored the actions and they've been converted into the programming language VBA. And even though that can be an intimidating environment, anytime you create a macro, it's worth seeing that code, because at different times you will need to work with macros more closely than simply recording them and then using them. So how do we get to the actual code that's in the background? A couple of different ways. From the View tab in the ribbon, we can choose the Macros button right here. We'll see a list of the macros in the current workbook or perhaps in all open workbooks. We can simply click the macro we're interested in, for example, highlight number cells, and then off to the right, choose Edit, and the screen change will be substantial. We're in a totally different environment here. We're in the VBA window, as it's called, Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications. And what we see here sometimes can be a bit overwhelming. We're actually seeing Visual Basic code. Now, when you enter this environment at certain times, you're not seeing everything you need to see. So a couple of windows here are absolutely critical. One's called VBA Project. It's nearly always visible. If not, you want to choose View Project Explorer. The code window to the right, of course, is critical. We want to see this code at different times. If it's not present, View Code. It is in this case. You might see a properties window below. We'll talk more about that in later movies. It's not as important, but occasionally it's handy for making some changes. And what we see over here, without going into too much detail, is we'll see an icon for every open workbook. There's only one here. And if there are macros, we will see them in modules. This is module 1. There are 2 macros here. One was written a long time ago. One was created in the previous movie. Highlight number cells. This is the code. Now, the idea here is not suddenly to start mastering VBA code. Some proficient Excel users use macros frequently. They don't necessarily know a lot about the code. They know how to manipulate it a little bit. They know a few key statements they will sometimes type in. But many times the recording process takes care of most of what we need to have done here. Now, we can easily move back and forth between this window and Excel by pressing Alt F11. Alt F11. If you forget that, you could also get to the VBA window, not only by the View tab, but also by the Developer tab. Off to the left, you'll see Visual Basic. And as you slide over it, there's that keystroke shortcut, Alt F11. So we could certainly go that way as well. And again, Alt F11 takes us back and forth between the two environments. As you work with macros, you'll frequently use that keystroke shortcut as you're moving back and forth between the environment where you see the code and you see the actual data you'll be working with. Now, without going into too much detail about what we're seeing here, just a few things. Notice how both macros begin and end with the word sub. Any text that you see in green always has a single quote to the left of it. Those are comments, and they have nothing to do with the actual code. A lot of those are generated automatically as well, too. Now, just a couple of changes here, and to emphasize that we can do this. From time to time, as you become more familiar with this, you might want to make some small changes. The macro that highlighted the number cells ended by jumping to cell A1. And that's fine, and it wasn't truly necessary, but just for the sake of argument and demonstration here, if you say, well, every time I use this, I want this to jump to cell B3, well, let's change the A1 to B3. Let's try this macro again. Its keystroke shortcut is Control-Shift-N. Let's press Alt F11, jump back into Excel. Maybe we'll go to this worksheet here, take off the color that was applied earlier. Just on the Home tab there, manually remove the color. So we're going to run this macro again with Control-Shift-M, and it's going to end up not in cell A1, but remember what we did. So I press Alt F11 here. we're going to make the active cell, as we see at the bottom here, jump to cell B3. Just for the sake of argument, to show that we can do this, I'll press Control-Shift-N. It's going to highlight the number cells and jump to cell B3. Small change, not a big deal, but just to point out that there will be times you will be editing that code and make changes to it. Once again, I'll press Alt F11. Another small example would change. The previous macro, the one that was written a while ago, displays values in millions. It uses 2 trailing commas in the format. Maybe when you use this, you want to have a $sign applied. Or let's say most of the time you'd like to be able to do that. I'll make a change in the format here. This is within the code. I'll add a $sign. The keystroke shortcut for that macro is Control-Shift-M. So pressing Alt F11, jumping back into, not this worksheet, but say Budget 2017. These are large numbers. I'd like to have these displayed in millions with a $sign. Control-Shift-M. So we see that there. So we can easily make changes to macros. But the whole idea of VBA, and it can be an intimidating environment, is anytime you create a macro, I strongly suggest press Alt F11, take a look at the code. Even if you're not a programmer or never want to be, as you look at this code over time, you begin to absorb it, pick up on some of the things that actually were being done. If you recorded this, you probably remember what you did. From time to time, you'll see some lines that you'll get rid of. At other times, you'll say, well, yeah, I know what that line does. Most of the time, you will not be typing code like this. In later examples, you'll see how certain VBA statements you will type. But let's face it, much of the time, macro creation has to do with the recording process. And then later, we review some of the statements here. We make some changes occasionally, but you don't want to get overwhelmed. You want to strike a balance between saying, in effect, I'm a little bit inquisitive about this, but at the same time, I don't need to know a whole lot. Some people do take a stronger interest in this, and that's great. They'll be taking a course in VBA. There's one available at lynda.com, and there's certainly courses available in community colleges too. A lot of people take those too if they want to master this language. But many Excel users are totally comfortable with using this without necessarily mastering that language, VBA. So anytime you've got a macro in any worksheet, Alt F11 will get you there quickly or back into Excel. And when we close and save a workbook, those changes that we made to the macros get saved as well.